You're standing in line at the pharmacy. Your phone is at 1%. There is nothing to look at except a rack of chapstick and a stranger's shoulder. And within about 90 seconds, something in your chest starts to itch. Not sadness, not anger, something closer to distress. You call it boredom, but the real answer is far stranger. Boredom is not the absence of stimulation. It is your brain sounding an alarm. In 2014, a psychologist named Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia ran an experiment that sounds almost too strange to be real. He put people alone in a bare room for 15 minutes with nothing to do. No phone, no book, just their own thoughts. Before the session, participants were shown a device that could deliver a mild electric shock, and every one of them said they would pay money to avoid being shocked again. Then Wilson left them alone with that same device sitting on the table. 25% of women and 67% of men chose to shock themselves rather than sit quietly with their own minds. One man shocked himself hundreds of times. Think about that for a second. People chose pain over stillness. Not once, out of confusion. Some chose it dozens of times, fully aware of what was coming. Why would a brain do that? To understand it, you have to go back further than pharmacies and waiting rooms, further than boredom as a modern inconvenience, a minor annoyance you scroll your way out of. You have to go back to a body built for constant, low-grade danger, and a mind that never fully updated its instructions. For most of human history, doing nothing was not neutral. It was a warning sign. If you were an early human sitting still in the open for too long, you were exposed. Predators notice stillness. A motionless shape in tall grass is exactly what a hunting animal is trained to scan for. Rival groups notice stillness too. Stillness meant you weren't gathering food, weren't watching the tree line, weren't building shelter before the temperature dropped. Every hour spent doing nothing was an hour not spent staying alive. A brain that could tolerate long stretches of unstimulated inactivity was, in a very literal sense, attached to a body that might not survive the week. So evolution did what it always does when a behavior threatened survival. It built in a punishment. Not a gentle nudge, a punishment uncomfortable enough that almost nobody could sit through it without flinching. That punishment is boredom. John Eastwood, a psychologist at York University who has spent much of his career studying this exact feeling, defines boredom in a very specific way. He describes it as the uncomfortable feeling of wanting to be engaged in a satisfying activity but being unable to do so. Notice what that definition does not say. It doesn't say boredom is a lack of things happening around you. A silent room and a slow meeting can both be objectively uneventful, yet only one might bore you, depending on whether your mind can latch onto something inside it. Eastwood's point is that boredom is a mismatch between your brain's demand for engagement and your ability to meet that demand. Your brain wants a task. It wants a target, something to chew on, something to move toward. And when it doesn't get one, it doesn't just sit patiently and wait for circumstances to improve. It starts generating alarms. This is where the physical pain comparison stops being a metaphor and starts being neurology. James Dankert, a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Waterloo who has run brain imaging studies on boredom, has found that the neural networks activated during boredom overlap with networks involved in processing frustration and even physical discomfort. Your brain does not have a completely separate wiring system for boredom versus pain. It borrows circuitry that already exists for something more urgent. Which means the itch you feel in a waiting room and the flinch you feel from a paper cut are, at a structural level, closer relatives than you'd expect. Different intensity, same underlying alarm. Ask yourself why that would be useful. What would a brain gain by treating idle time the same way it treats an injury? Pain exists to protect the body. It flags damage and demands attention until the damage is addressed. If boredom shares its wiring, that suggests boredom is protecting something too, just not tissue. It's protecting time. In an environment where every unproductive hour carried real risk, a mind that could shrug off long stretches of idleness without discomfort was a liability to the body carrying it. So, natural selection didn't leave that tolerance for stillness intact. It attached a cost to it, the same way it attached a cost to touching fire or eating something rotten. Discomfort was the tool. Discomfort was what kept ancient humans moving, watching, working, instead of drifting into the kind of extended stillness that got noticed by the wrong set of eyes.
That's a strange thing to sit with. The same biological machinery that makes a burn hurt is, at least in part, the same machinery that makes a slow Tuesday afternoon feel unbearable. So, why did people choose electric shocks over empty thought?
Because to an ancient nervous system, unstructured stillness registers as a threat that needs resolving. And a brief, controllable jolt of pain is, in a strange way, easier to process than an unresolved, open-ended alarm with no target. Pain has a beginning and an end. You know exactly what it is and exactly when it stops. Untethered boredom does not offer that mercy. It just hums, low and constant, with no clear resolution in sight. Your brain would rather handle a problem it understands than sit inside a warning it can't switch off.
Here's where it gets even stranger. Boredom isn't random. It's directional. It doesn't just make you uncomfortable and leave you there, it makes you seek. Researchers studying boredom have consistently found that it functions less like a passive emotion and more like an internal compass, similar in structure to hunger or thirst. Hunger points you toward food. Thirst points you toward water. Boredom points you toward stimulation. Any stimulation, almost indiscriminately, the way a compass needle swings toward north without caring what's actually up there. That's why in Wilson's experiment, an electric shock was more appealing than nothing at all. It's not that people enjoyed pain, it's that their brains were desperate for a direction to move in, and pain at least gave them one. A target beats no target, even when the target hurts. This reframes something almost every person alive today has felt and never questioned. The reflex to reach for your phone the instant a line gets long, or a meeting goes quiet, or a conversation lulls into silence. You've probably assumed that's a modern habit, a symptom of short attention spans and too much scrolling. But the compulsion existed long before screens did. People fidgeted, paced, doodled, and picked at their fingernails for tens of thousands of years before anyone invented a feed to scroll. Screens didn't invent the alarm, they just gave it the fastest, most efficient off switch it has ever had. And that fast shutoff comes at a cost most people never notice, because the cost doesn't announce itself, it just quietly accumulates. Because boredom, uncomfortable as it is, used to serve a purpose beyond survival. Idle, unstimulated time is also where the brain does something it physically cannot do while occupied. It wanders. It connects unrelated ideas that have been sitting in separate corners of memory for months. It replays experiences and rearranges them into new patterns, testing combinations your conscious mind never deliberately tried. Some of the most well-documented moments of creative insight in recorded history, scientific breakthroughs, sudden solutions to problems that had been stuck for weeks, occurred not during focused effort at a desk, but during idle stretches. A walk with no destination, a shower with no phone in reach, a long stare out a train window at nothing in particular. The discomfort of boredom was, in a sense, the price of admission to a mental state that focused attention simply cannot produce. Now picture what happens when that discomfort never gets the chance to build past its first few seconds. The instant a lull appears, a phone fills it. The alarm sounds and is silenced almost immediately, over and over, dozens of times a day, every day. You never sit inside the itch long enough for your mind to wander anywhere useful. You just keep resetting the alarm a few seconds after it starts ringing, forever catching it at the very beginning and never letting it run its course. What do you think gets lost when that never happens? What ideas simply never arrive because the room they needed to form in was never left empty long enough? This is the modern mirror, hiding inside an ancient reflex. You are not weak-willed for reaching for your phone in a quiet moment. You have not failed some test of discipline that other, more focused people are passing. You are running software written for a world where stillness meant danger, and boredom meant get moving, find food, watch the tree line, do not just sit here. That software has no concept of a smartphone, a waiting room chair, or a slow afternoon at a desk job. It only knows one instruction, repeated the same way it has been repeated for hundreds of thousands of years. Resolve this feeling immediately by any available means and worry about what those means actually are later. It's worth noticing how rarely you're given the chance to test what happens if you don't obey that instruction. Almost every gap in modern life comes pre-filled with an escape hatch. A screen in your pocket, a notification waiting to be checked, a show that autoplays before the credits finish rolling. The ancient alarm goes off, and modern life answers it before you've even had time to feel the full shape of the discomfort. You silence something you were never actually forced to sit with. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If the alarm exists to push you toward useful action, and you spend your whole life silencing it instantly, are you actually getting the benefit it evolved to provide? Or are you just getting really efficiently good at making the alarm stop without ever finding out what it was trying to point you toward in the first place? So the next time you're standing in a slow-moving line, or sitting in a waiting room with a dead phone, or lying awake at night with nothing to occupy you, and that familiar itch creeps in, you can recognize it for what it actually is. Not a personal failing, not proof that you can't handle silence, or that your attention span is somehow broken compared to generations before you. It's a 200,000-year-old alarm system, still faithfully doing its job in a world it was never built for, still firing off warnings about dangers that vanished long ago. You're not bored because something is wrong with you. You're bored because for most of human history, standing still could get you killed.